When night falls and sound withdraws, the archive remains. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. Air occupies every interval before it is noticed. It sits between wall and table, between ceiling and floor, between the edge of one object and the edge of another, filling the room without giving the room any additional shape. In the afternoon, it tends to vanish from attention because it offers little resistance. Light crosses it with minimal scattering. Sound crosses it with a loss that feels ordinary. Distance seems transparent because the medium behaves consistently. On certain evenings, the transparency changes while the geometry remains fixed. A room is still a room. The width from one wall to the opposite wall does not shorten. The corridor still contains the same number of steps from door to door, yet the interval between points behaves differently, not as mood, not as metaphor, but as a measurable shift in transmission. The same events occur, and what arrives is less articulated. The path has changed, while the length of the path has not. A door closes somewhere nearby. At the hinge, the contact is clean, and the initial transient contains sharpness, high-frequency energy that defines the edge of the event. Across the room, the arrival is softened. The volume may not be dramatically lower, yet the contour is rounded. The first instant has lost its crisp boundary before it reaches the ear. The medium has altered the crossing. Sound moves through air as alternating compression and rarefaction. Molecules collide, transferring energy forward. In lighter conditions, those collisions disperse energy in a pattern that preserves detail across moderate distance. Sibilants remain recognizable. Small impacts retain their bite. Reflections return as faint tails that extend the event beyond its origin. When the air becomes denser through cooling, increased humidity, reduced convection, the number and character of interactions per unit distance change. The medium's mass per unit volume increases. Inertia within the medium increases. Certain frequencies lose coherence sooner. The decay curve steepens without the source changing at all. Breath enters, breath leaves. The lungs draw in the same medium that shapes the room's reach. A spoon touches ceramic. At the point of contact, the vibration is precise. Across the room, the arrival contains less definition. The body of the sound remains, but the outline has blurred. Something has been absorbed in transit. The object did not soften. The hand did not change. Only the interval intervened, taking away part of what would normally survive. Between the spoon and the ear, nothing visible occupies the distance, and yet the distance is occupied. What the air removes in transit, it removes without remainder. Not stored, not redirected, simply no longer present in what arrives. Loss without trace, absence without record. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between the two, nothing needs to be grasped. Angle continues to lower. A corner is reached. The projected boundary bends without crease. It conforms instantly to the new direction of surface. The bend is not effort, it is alignment. When a step interrupts the plane, the projection divides. Part remains on the upper surface. Part appears on the vertical face. The shadow does not fall as an object would. It simply occupies whichever surfaces lie in the region deprived of direct illumination. A door frame divides it. Gravel fractures it into fragments. Each fragment is not a broken piece, but a local solution to the same geometry applied to a different microplane. Where gravel fractures the projection, Each stone receives its own small solution. The top face of a raised pebble is lit. Its far side is not. A tiny dark region forms behind it, too small to read as shadow from any distance, but present as the same phenomenon at a smaller scale. The projection across the gravel is therefore not one shadow but many, all governed by the same source, all obeying the same geometry, each resolved by its own local surface. The scene contains the same relation at every scale simultaneously. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. The archive, if it notices anything, does not privilege the source. It privileges what lies between, not the event itself, but the transformation that occurs as the event moves through the medium. In this kind of evening air, distance still exists as measurement, but it exists less as carrier of information. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. When air is light, it makes space feel open because it allows extension. Sound strikes a wall and returns faintly. That return is not an echo that demands attention. It is a small additional line that lengthens the original event, giving it width in time and width in space. When air gains density, less energy survives that round trip. The return weakens, the tail shortens. Events conclude closer to where they began. The room does not shrink, yet it feels less broadcast because transmission is less generous. 2 points across the room remain 2 points. The interval between them becomes less transparent, not because something visible fills it, but because the medium asserts itself through loss. A candle, if there were one, would illuminate less of the wall behind it tonight than it would on a dry winter evening. Same flame, same wall, different medium. The candle does not know this. The wall does not know this. Only the air between them holds the difference, and it holds it without display, without record, the way all conditions hold themselves, by simply being what they are until they are something else. A footstep occurs in an adjacent corridor. The floor receives the same force. The body's mass does not change, yet the footstep arrives with reduced texture. The heel's brief sharpness is diminished first. The remaining sound is present, but it is less edged, and the event ends sooner because the air does not return as much of it from the surfaces. A clock continues. The mechanism is unchanged. Each tick is produced with the same impulse, yet each tick occupies less perceived space. The tail that would normally extend into the silence between ticks is shorter. Time has not accelerated. The air has reduced the lingering. What persists between ticks is not silence in the usual sense. It is the medium continuing to hold what little remains of the last event, while the next event has not yet arrived. A thin suspension. Not emptiness, not presence. The interval itself, made audible as texture by the air's density. Humidity gathers as the temperature drops. Cooler air settles nearer the floor. Warmer air remains above. Layers form, sometimes subtle enough to be felt only as a difference at ankle height versus chest height. Within layered air, transmission changes again. Sound can refract slightly along gradients, bending with temperature and density differences. Nothing dramatic is required. Even small gradients can alter how certain frequencies carry. The room becomes a medium with strata rather than a uniform field. A voice from another room reaches the ear in parts. Consonants dissolve first because they rely on rapid oscillations, high-frequency energy that disperses quickly. Vowels remain as broader bands. Meaning dissolves into tone. The air does not prevent sound from existing. It prevents sound from arriving intact. Light behaves differently in the same conditions. A denser medium, with more suspended moisture and particulate matter, scatters and diffuses. Illumination appears to spend itself sooner across distance. It is not that a lamp becomes weaker. It is that contrast thins. Surfaces still reflect, but reflection becomes more even, less crisp, less directional. Letters remain legible at close range, but the surrounding space feels filled, less clear, as though the air itself has acquired a faint surface. Breath enters, breath leaves. The medium enters and leaves with the same steadiness as before, yet it feels more present because it resists extension. Outside, geometry remains stable. Lampposts remain vertical. Signs remain fixed to walls. A figure at the end of the street remains visible as an outline, yet detail does not travel. Presence arrives without precision. Movement appears slower, not because velocity changes, but because transmission loses edge. What the eye receives is less sharply separated frame to frame. A bicycle passes. Near the source, the event is layered. Chain engagement, tire contact, small irregularities of pavement. With distance, components merge. Texture disappears first. Presence remains. The air compresses the radius of detail. The world becomes less broadcast, more contained, not by walls, but by medium. A street lamp at the end of the road illuminates the same radius it always has. The bulb draws the same current. The glass has not fogged. Yet the light appears to spend itself within a shorter distance tonight, not because less light is emitted, but because more is scattered before it reaches distance. The cone of illumination looks fuller, softer, more self-contained. Light that would have continued is returned to the air close to the source. The lamp glows more inwardly. The street beyond it is darker, not because light was withheld, but because the medium kept more of it near. Indoors, the medium's effect is heard in how architecture fails to amplify. In lighter air, a scrape, a click, a small impact will find the room's surfaces and return faintly, adding thin reflections that extend the event. In denser still air, reflection is diminished. The event remains near its origin. A chair slides. The scrape forms a short line and ends. The sound does not draw itself outward. It settles. Corners hold stillness. Near the floor, cooler air accumulates, and the boundary between a hallway and a room becomes more than a visual threshold. Not because the door frame has changed, but because circulation narrows and slows. Where flow is restricted, density feels greater. A doorway behaves like a boundary in transmission. What passes through arrives less defined on the other side, as if the medium thickens at constriction. A book closes. At the source, contact is clean. Across space, the arrival is rounded. The beginning is softened, the end is sooner. No reflective tail follows. It is not silence that follows, but a return to a filled interval. Air that does not carry far. A window exists on one wall. Cold outside, warmer within. Along the glass, a thin layer of air holds a slightly different temperature than the air a hand's width away. That layer moves differently from the room's general air, slower, denser, hugging the surface. It does not mix readily. It persists as a boundary condition, a narrow region where two temperatures negotiate without resolving. The glass does not feel this. The air on both sides does not know the other exists, yet the boundary holds, maintained by the same physics that makes clouds form and fog settle and breath become visible on cold mornings. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the room remains occupied by the same medium, and the medium continues to reduce extension. The radius of detail contracts across modalities. Sound concludes sooner. Light loses crispness sooner. Even the sense of distance changes because distance is partly inferred from clarity. When clarity travels less, the brain receives less of what it normally uses to locate, separate, and expand space. The room retains measurement. The room loses reach. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. A car passes outside. The engine's layered frequencies merge into a single band more quickly than in daytime. The tires become less textured, more like a presence than a pattern. It is known that something passes, and then it is gone. The medium closes over it. A small splash in a gutter occurs. Water strikes water. The event registers and ends. No echo traces it. No ringing persists. The air keeps the event local. Temperature continues to fall toward equilibrium with surfaces. Relative humidity rises as the air approaches its dew point. Moisture begins to condense invisibly on stone, metal, and glass, changing reflectivity subtly. Dry surfaces that returned sharper reflections now return softer ones. Light becomes less directional. Edges soften not because objects blur, but because the medium and surface together reduce contrast. Sound behaves similarly. With increased density and reduced reflective return, the decay constant remains high. Vibrations lose amplitude quickly. The room becomes a container not because it is sealed, but because extension is no longer rewarded by the medium. Breath enters, breath leaves. The medium participates in the breath, and the breath participates in the medium without commentary. In this condition, silence is not emptiness. It is fullness without projection. Events do not stretch into distance. They arise and settle. The air does not erase. It contains. What the air contains tonight is not quite silence and not quite sound. It is the residue of the day's events, absorbed and held in the medium's increased mass. The footstep that ended sooner than usual. The voice that dissolved before it arrived complete. The bicycle that passed as presence rather than detail. None of these are stored as memory in the air. The air has no memory. Yet something of each event was given to the medium and did not pass through. It was kept briefly, as heat is kept in stone, not as record, but as condition. By morning, the air will thin again, cool again, carry again. What it held tonight will not be recovered. It will only be gone. As the night settles further, movement within the medium reduces to almost nothing. Convection that earlier produced subtle vertical exchange slows as temperature equalizes between surface and air. The layers that once differed in density begin to approach uniformity. The air no longer circulates in small currents along walls and across ceilings. It rests. Stillness does not mean emptiness. Molecules continue their motion colliding, transferring energy in patterns too small to observe. Yet on the scale of the room there is no drift, no directional flow, no redistribution that alters transmission from moment to moment. The capacity to carry sound remains. The capacity to scatter light remains. The capacity to absorb high-frequency energy remains. What changes is variation. Variation reduces. The room has arrived at a condition that asks nothing of its contents. The table asks nothing of the chair. The chair asks nothing of the floor. The air asks nothing of the surfaces it rests against. Each thing has found the temperature it will hold until morning, the position it will occupy without shifting, the weight it will carry without complaint. This is not resignation. It is the room at its most itself, not performing stillness, simply having arrived at it through the long subtraction of the day. A sound could occur and would still propagate, yet it would conclude quickly, because the medium does not favor extension. Reflection remains minimal. Return remains weak. Events would remain local. Breath enters, breath leaves. The density of the air does not resist the breath. It does not announce itself. Yet its presence is felt a subtle resistance at the edge of inhalation. The lungs fill more deliberately, not because the body has changed, but because the medium has weight relative to motion. There is a particular quality to this weight that does not announce itself as heaviness. It is not the weight of pressure, not the weight of obstruction. It is the weight of a medium that has grown more present, more itself than it was at noon. Air that was a convenience has become a condition. The room has not changed. The air has remembered what it is. In denser, still air, even small temperature differences at the surface of skin dissipate more slowly. Heat transfer alters slightly. The boundary between body and room becomes less abrupt. The medium participates in exchange. No echo extends outward. No shimmer lingers at the edge of a sound. No bright edge of light projects far into the room. The interval remains filled. Distance continues to exist as measurement, but it no longer exists as expansion. Space feels complete rather than open, not smaller, complete. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. A faint mechanical click occurs somewhere in the structure of the building. It arrives softened and ends without resonance. Nothing returns from the walls. The medium accepts it and releases it into equilibrium. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. Objects remain where they are. Walls remain vertical. The ceiling remains above. Somewhere in the room, a surface holds a temperature slightly cooler than the air beside it. The air in contact with that surface has slowed its motion by a fraction. Not visible, not audible. A local condition, persisting because no force is present to disrupt it. That surface and that thin layer of air have arrived at a quiet agreement, neither moving, neither changing, neither requiring the other to be anything other than what it is at this hour, in this stillness, in this medium that has finally grown heavy enough to rest. Transmission rests within containment. No extension seeks amplification. No surface offers echo. No event exceeds its origin. The medium does not withdraw. It does not thin. It simply remains. There is a particular quality to a room when the air has grown heavy enough to keep things close. Not oppressive, not sealed, more like a room that has decided quietly to hold what it contains rather than pass it outward. Sound stays near its source. Light stays near its lamp. Warmth stays near the body. Each thing remains in relation only to what is immediately beside it. The room becomes a collection of small proximities rather than a single connected field. And in that collection, something releases. The effort of being aware of distance, of tracking what is far, of maintaining the sense of where one thing ends and another begins across the room. The medium has done that work without being asked. It has closed the distances by making them less traversable. The room is not smaller. The room is simply closer to itself. The interval stays occupied. Nothing disperses. Nothing insists. The room holds.